guess this one is going to depend on your rank. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and a number of you have asked me just how much of a VA disability claim you need in order to offset your military pay. Now, this always strikes me as kind of an odd question because among field grade officers, this isn't really a question that we worry about, and you'll see why in a second. But it turns out that among NCOs, this is a question worth looking into. In a recent video, I walked you through the VA disability payments for different ratings and then different numbers and types of dependents. And one of the important takeaways is that your VA disability payment is not based on your rank, your years of service, or where you live. So a private who gets a 70% disability rating because he broke his hip in basic training and then heads back to small town USA, well, he gets the same VA disability payment as a retired lieutenant colonel with a 70% rating who has, sleep apnea and lives in San Francisco. As a result, the VA payments have a bigger impact on the post-retirement finances of non-commissioned officers. All right, so brace yourself. I am going to slap together a whole bunch of back-of-the-envelope math, and then I'm going to show you more charts than either of us want to deal with. I tried to get it into a single chart, but it was too messy. First, the mathy part. For a given rank, I'm going to estimate their base pay and their basic allowance for subsistence at years 20 through 40 of years of service. And when we look at commissioned officers, I'm only really going to go out to 30. You're going to notice that I am ignoring basic allowance for housing. And the reason is because that's really location specific. I kind of assume that if somebody is going to live in an expensive area and try to offset that added cost, well, they're kind of stuck doing it with a civilian job. This gives us the black box as a benchmark of pre-retirement pay. Next, I'm going to estimate the pension. I'm going to use the high 3 plan with a multiplier of 2.5% for every year of service. I put that in the chart with a green bar. So now we can see how much of the active duty pay is made up with just the pension. As far as estimating the VA payment, here I'm just using the veterans only pay scale. Veterans can, and of course many do, get increases to their VA disability payments for dependents like spouse or children or dependent parents, but for our purposes, I'm just going to stick with the veteran themselves. The tricky part is how to represent those various levels of VA disability rating. Essentially, what I've done here is stack the incremental increases from 50% to 100%. So a 50% rating, when added to your pension, will get you as high as this pale checkered bar, and a 100% rating will get you all the way up to the top of the dark orange. There is one important consideration here. I want you to notice that I'm not bothering with disability ratings between 10% and 40%. That's because retirees only qualify for concurrent retired and disability pay, CRDP, if they have a rating of 50% or more. So if you have less than a 50% VA rating, well, none of this is really going to matter to you. All right, so let's test drive this whole thing by looking at majors. One of the reasons I think this is a good place to start is, well, a lot of officers who were prior service, they start to contemplate their retirement at the rank of major. And while a lot of ROTC and West Point officers who only make it to major, well, they don't stick around past 20 years. When it comes to those prior enlisted majors, it's possible that they can stay far longer just because of all the time they spent in enlisted status. Here you can see that a major has to serve 26 years for the combination of a VA disability and their pension to exceed their base pay and BAS, and that the VA rating has to be 100%. Anything lower, and it won't make up the difference. And this remains true all the way out to 30 years. Now, in a second, I'm going to focus on the senior enlisted retirees because honestly, that's where the magic happens here. But before I do that, let's cover the other field grade ranks, pretty much just to get them out of the way. A lieutenant colonel basically faces the same dilemma as the major. They need a 100% disability rating to make up the gap, and they can only really do that if they have about 28 years of service. Colonels, Navy captains, it's even more dramatic because they would need 30 years and a 100% rating. But these characters are not exactly going to get sympathy from anybody because the whole driver of that gap is the fact that their pay is so much higher and as a result their pension is so much higher. Where things get interesting is with the senior NCOs. A sergeant major with 24 years and a 100% disability can match their base pay and BAS. And what's more, depending on how long they serve, they can actually achieve this with lower VA ratings. With 39 years of service and even a 50% rating, they can offset their active duty pay. It shouldn't be surprising that an E8 can fill that gap faster, even at 20 years of service. A 100% disability appears to get them back up to their military pay. And by the time they have 30 years of service, they can achieve this feat with far lower levels of disability. And E7, it's even more so. Now, before I move on to the so what, I do want to flash some charts for warrant officers. Warrant officers always seem to get left out of these discussions because you're such a small population. But you also run into this problem where in some cases, a warrant officer has to think about things like an NCO. And sometimes they have to think like a field grade officer. When it comes to this question about offsetting military pay, it seems that warrant officers need to think about it more like sergeants major than anybody else. Now, is all of this perfect? Dear God, no. I mean, I'm making a lot of assumptions, I'm moving fast, and everybody's personal situation is different. But you do gotta ask, so what? Well, at the beginning of this video, I told you how a sergeant major friend of mine kept asking this question, but my colonel brain kept ignoring it. Hopefully, by now, it should become clear that the reason for this is that among field grade officers, it's really unlikely that the VA disability is going to let you completely offset your military pay. But what this means is that as you approach your own retirement or transition, you have to pay close attention to the rank of the person who is giving you advice. Most people who know a lot about retirement, well, they learned all of that while they were going through their own retirement process. As a result, the kind of advice that they give people tends to be the advice that they would give themselves if they could go back in time. And while a lieutenant colonel's advice might be great advice for another lieutenant colonel, it could be awful advice for a master sergeant, and vice versa. So seek advice from your peers. Second, I'm pretty sure that a key takeaway is that for non-commissioned officers, that VA rating matters more. I mean, sure, $5 is $5 no matter who you are, but the lower your pension, the more that $5 matters. Finally, and this might just be my field grade officer bias rearing its ugly head again, I think this has an important implication for retiring officers. You cannot maintain your current level of spending just based off your pension and VA disability. You have to either control your spending or get a job. While a master sergeant may be able to smoothly take their uniform off, transition into living a life that they've been accustomed to, field grade officers can't. You have to plan your finances more carefully. And, in particular, there is one dangerous mistake that you might make when it comes to your housing solution, And if you want to understand more about that, watch this video.